Welcome to the Change Within podcast. This is Gerard Uselli here. We are on episode 16. I can't believe it, but it is incredible how change can relate to so many people at once. And especially during the pandemic, all walks of life are really coming to fruition to express their stories of change. And this is no exception to the rule because we have a very special guest for today. And his name is Steven Anderson. Steven, how are you today?
Good. How you doing, my friend? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, Stephen, as an author, you have done some incredible work, and we'll definitely get into that as the interview commences. But there is one thing I want to ask that I ask every guest on the Change Within podcast. What was your childhood like growing up?
For sure. Thanks for that question. So, yeah, I had a good childhood. Very close knit family. Two sisters, one brother. Lived in New Jersey my entire life. A little bit of more of a shy kid. Very studious. My mom was it was very important to her that we all went to school, we studied, we did all our work. So a lot of studying, a lot of pretending to study and instead playing video games and watching basketball games. But overall, I can't complain. And then, as I got a little older, when I turned 12, my mom actually had a heart attack and suffered traumatic brain injury. And that kind of reshaped how I started to view things, right? So it was a big impact on my entire family, not just myself. From there, started to feel certain ways that I wasn't familiar with and couldn't really understand. Started to have some panic attacks here and there. But it did bring our family closer. And we all take the time to take care of my mom, but it's been a good life. I can't complain too much.
Absolutely. And for the hardships that you've went through, I cannot agree more because for the people that are in your life and for how it molds you in your future, it does bring you to the accolades eventually that you're willing to grasp. And when there is a will, there is a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It definitely shaped my adult years and growing up and, learning patience and learning a few other things. So glad my mom's still here. So can't complain.
Surely. And from that point forward, like, especially during those times, what kind of writing did you start doing? And when was the first time you felt like you were good at it?
Yes, I always thought I was a pretty creative kid. Most of the stuff I was doing back then, I was more involved in graphic design. I would draw a lot. So if I had some thoughts or something I was thinking through or something I wanted to put on paper, I was drawing. Throughout, high school and my English classes and throughout college, some of my creative writing classes, I just liked the ability to be able to tell a story, to build characters and start from beginning to end. And then within the past year, and especially with the pandemic, I had the idea to take of some of the thoughts I've had, something I felt in my adult years as well as my childhood years, and start putting them on paper. I'm not sure if I've ever felt necessarily that I'm the best writer, but I feel that I'm genuine, right? I reflect how I'm feeling at that time in my writing, and I've been able to receive feedback from others that they can relate. It's something that they're feeling on their end as well, and that's pretty powerful.
Do you remember a time or maybe the first time you shared your work with others and you felt like confident with it?
Yeah, definitely. So I would always share stories with my friends. The stories I used to write were a little more humor driven. They weren't as serious in tone. But even with these projects, which I know we'll talk about probably a little bit later, but with my first book, Memory Error, being able to share that and some thoughts that I had with friends and family and receiving feedback that they understand where I was coming from or something they could relate to, really was powerful. And then being able to get feedback on Cayden from, some of my friends and family and their children being able to give me feedback on this is something that they're experiencing, their kids are experiencing, and being able to translate some of what they're going through into a book was a nice change of pace.
Kind of as a one-off to that too, especially when you're writing something like a children's book. what was your perspective like in doing like your color palettes? Because I tried to write a children's book not too long ago, and just refining like what the color palettes are and how much attention to detail that takes. I'm sure you probably learned like a million things along the way in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever need help with that children's book, please feel free to reach out to me. We'd be glad to help. But yeah, so with Cayden, what I was trying to go for, and I know we'll talk through it, but dealing heavily with anxiety and unknown feelings from a child's perspective, not knowing what you're feeling, some pressures, some self-doubt, not knowing where you fit in the world necessarily, and if something changes, how that impacts you. So throughout the book went with a little bit more of a darker color palette for the earlier pages where the main character Cayden is feeling all these different feelings, and it's unknown and it's chaotic, and Cayden doesn't know what's happening. And then towards the end, what the visual is supposed to be is, as the mind begins to clear a little bit, the color starts to become more calm, and it's a more neutral palette color. And then at the end, with the ending of the book, where there is more of a positive turn, it's very bright, to kind of symbolize from the beginning the darkness that was felt at that moment and where you can go with the power of your own thoughts.
Absolutely. And then kind of like to bring it back a little bit, who was like the first author you started to read more than one book from? Because I feel like when that's the case, especially in today's age, where you're paying that actual attention for an author's actual sense of writing perspective, who was like the first person that kind of came to your mind?
So I've always been interested in books, but where I feel like I found most of my inspiration to write is more from the music side, so from lyricists. So I've been a big fan of music forever, from everything from rap to metal to hardcore, indie, everything in between. So one of my main influences is, there's the lead singer of a band from Indian Lakes. His name is Joey Vannucci. And just, I don't know, as far back as I can remember, as soon as I found the band one day on YouTube, I've been listening to them since. So his lyrics are very powerful, but it leaves room for interpretation, right? They're not direct. It takes some time for you to really read in and see what he could be meaning. And that's where I've tried to take some of my inspiration from. I'm hoping I'm someday going to be at his writing level. But yeah, I take my inspiration from there. I'm also pretty big into movies. I don't know if it's reflected into my work right now, but big fan of Wes Anderson, not just because of the last, but very particular about how things look, and the symmetry and certain things in my book. As I'm sure both of the illustrators from both books can attest to, I was pretty particular about very tiny, minute changes throughout the way. So take my inspiration from all media.
There you go, right? It's kind of funny you were talking about lyricists. So I'm not sure if you're like really into that much indie rock, but I will say this. I had Nick Thomas from the Spill Canvas on not too long ago for this podcast. And
Yes.
It was very interesting to like get his perspective, even from like an indie forefront, going into like his compound rhyming and understanding how big of a hip hop fan he was.
Oh, for sure. And just in general, that was a great podcast, by the way. Very exciting to have someone from the Spoke Canvas on. But yeah, from listening to music and the rhyming schemes, which occurs in the children's book, as well as my prior work, Memory Error, you really start to pick up on how to properly use those schemes from rap or anything that it might be. So absolutely.
And then I know you went into a little detail as far as how the story goes for Cayden and the Singing Monsters, but how did the concept initially come about?
Yes. So when I first wrote Memory Error, which is more of a poetry collection, thoughts that I've gone through in my adult years, I wanted to also capture what I had gone through in my childhood. So any feelings of doubt or fear about the future or anxiety, I wanted to be able to capture that and share that with other children who would be able to relate. So I was able to share that with relatives and their children, and go through the process of making sure that the wording I was using wasn't too adult, or it made sense to children, and they were able to relate to it, even if they couldn't fully understand some of the emotions that were being put forward in the book. They'd be at least able to relate to the feeling of the unknown, right? So from the beginning to the end, the way it all kind of came about, it was literally just an idea. With memory error, I know you're familiar with this, Gerard. One day I was just driving to Staten Island. I had my hour drive ahead of me. And as I was taking the drive, I thought about wanting to publish something, and I wanted to publish some of my poetry. So that's where that started. And then with Cayden, it was the same idea. Why not make this a broader view, have people of all ages be able to relate to words on paper?
So what you're saying is it usually takes a memory error just to go into Staten Island alone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually,
you could thank the $15 toll on that one.
Oh yeah, those tolls keep my my wallet light. But yeah, it was almost I don't know the correct word for it, but memory error. It almost seemed meant to be. Where I work, there's a sign out front, and I had already come up with the idea for memory error. It was something I wanted to do. It has a lot of personal meaning to me. Even with the book itself, the pages are see-through to go through the different stages of memory and how that could impact the rest of your life. But I was at work one day, and there was a sign in front of our office, and it was having a glitch, and then it said memory error on the sign. So that was my signal to go ahead and work on this book.
And then kind of like as a follow-up to that, so as I'm sure you were expressing like the poems to your friends and family, was there ever that like aha moment between how you like express those poems? Did you have any funny instances that like your friends remembered from those times?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so memory error, there's a lot on the cutting room floor. It ended up only being 40 poems. There's an illustration for each poem. I worked closely with the illustrator on that book, Worried Hands, who I was able to locate on social media. And with that, just going through it, being able to pinpoint certain moments in my life that my friends would understand by reading memory error, but maybe not the larger audience would. It was an interesting experience. Certain poems that mean something to me and mean something to my parents and my family. As soon as they read it, it makes sense to them. But to other people, it's cool to see their perception of the words. How I meant it when I wrote it might be completely different than how they're interpreting it. And that's been one of the most fun parts about it. One, being able to relate to other people and hearing their experiences and hearing what they go through, and also being able to help them by having that dialogue. But then separately, just hearing all the different interpretations of the poems and hearing how it's impacted other people, it's been a pleasure.
And then also in that hindsight, so like, let's say for yourself, when you are publishing these books and people are providing feedback online, having having their criticisms, how does it feel when people are like giving those critiques and you don't even know them, whether it's good or bad?
Yeah, so with the critiques, it's always been a journey, right? So from a young age, dealing with any sort of critiques, whether it be about your appearance or your performance in anything, it's a growing process. So it's definitely something I didn't learn overnight. You learn to develop a little bit of a thicker skin, and sometimes that could be hard when you're writing something that's so personal to you. But for the most part, I'm glad, and a lot of the feedback I've received has been positive, and any that have been negative, it might just not be their style of book, right? So you can't change everyone's mind, but for those that it does have an impact on, it balances it out. So for every one negative comment I might receive, the one positive where it's impacted their child in a positive way, or they felt that they were able to relate to the book, it makes it all worth it.
So leads me to my next question on this, because I'm a firm believer that art imitates life. So following your book's concept, what's one song in real life your friends used to always like, but you weren't into? And what's one song you introduced to them that was received well?
It's a great question. Yes. So when it comes to music, like I said earlier, I'm always listening. I'm always looking for something new. I am always, any suggested video, any of the streaming platforms, YouTube, Spotify, word of mouth. I love finding out about new music. Sometimes when a band is presented to me or an artist, I cast it aside just because I'll be like, oh, it's another popular group. So the 1975, if you're familiar with that
Of
band.
course.
When I first heard that, I was like, oh, it's a popular group. Maybe I wouldn't have as much interest. But when I really took the time to listen to that somebody else song, especially when you're writing books like this, it gets you into the mood and into the creative path. So songs like that actually were beneficial in writing books like this. It's something I would listen to as I was writing. And then sharing my music, I'm constantly sharing music with other people. One of my favorite bands that I share is this band Movements, who also was a big inspiration to me.
Are they on Hopeless Records?
They are. You're
Yeah,
familiar with
I listened to them 4 years ago. I know exactly who they are.
them? Perfect. No, they're one of my favorite bands. So pretty much anyone who with open ears that will listen to what I've shared, and everyone I've showed it to seems to like it. But everything. My rap tastes, I like Denzel Curry, IDK.
Of course. You've gone down a whole rabbit hole, man. Let me tell you. You're already saying Denzel Curry. We're on a great pathway.
We'll have to schedule a separate podcast to talk about rap. No, but yeah, music, movies, it's really what I'm passionate about. So anytime I could share it and hearing someone like it, I love that. So I'm glad you know about Movements, brings some joy to my heart.
Well, let's see if it's the inspiration for your next book, right? But this is something I'm actually really curious about too. So you've had two different like perceptions as far as with your first and second book. Were your atmospheres different as far as how you wrote your books? Like, was kind of like the scenery different, or was it kind of like more of the same?
Yes. So I try to, with Memory Error, stay in the headspace of the thoughts I've had in adult life and try to go across the spectrum of some things I've had challenges with. So for the most part, when I was writing, and this might come across, I guess, slightly morbid, I was usually in a darker room, dimly lit, and I was listening to music that was more ambient noise. So more like shoegaze type music, just more listening, not listening to the words, but just hearing the sounds of the audio and trying to see if that evoked any sort of emotion so I could put it into the poetry. And we tried to do the same with the illustrations as well. I worked directly with the illustrator of Memory Error, Worried Hands, and worked to try to get her perception of each story as well. That way it wasn't just how I was feeling about it. So that collaboration was interesting as well, because a lot of the illustrations were how she perceived the words versus how I necessarily was presenting the words. And versus Cayden, I worked with a illustrator in Europe, Elizabeth Karen. And with that, it was a little bit more joyous, right? It is a children's book, it is a heavier topic, but in that scenario, I was still listening to music, but was listening to music with more of an upbeat, because I knew exactly where I wanted the story to go. And was also trying to gather some inspiration from just looking outside. Honestly, Memory Error was written during the beginning of the pandemic, so it was a perfect time to write something like that. Was home often, was in quarantine. Cayden was, over the summer and the fall where things were at least a little brighter. And maybe there was some hope in sight. So I think it definitely tied into how I wrote both books. And in both cases, thank God for technology, I wrote both books on my iPhone. So yeah, so I'm actually working on another book right now. That one, though, I'm planning to be a novel. So that one might go into a laptop. That might be a little too much for a phone.
Oh, you're taking it back 10 years on that one now.
Yeah, going a little bit back into history, but I'm looking forward to it.
So, as my final question that I like to ask everyone as well, what is the biggest change you want to see for yourself in 2021?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gerard. Obviously, there's some things that everyone says: be healthier, right, physically and mentally. But moving forward, I really want to continue down this path. I am working on this next book. It is going to be a novel, so that's going to take me some time. But I'm looking forward. I'm up to the challenge. Just with anything else, and what I think these books try to indicate to those who read them is, if you're going through something, you're having a hard time, you're experiencing challenges in your life, you're unsure about what you're feeling, it's not the end. There's the positive thinking, and it ties perfectly in with the change within. Change within yourself can lead to positive things, and just keep moving forward, even though sometimes it is very dark. There's people who care about you. There's people who are there and are willing to listen and hear your story. And this is a testament to that. I've had some challenges in my life. I've put them into written form and people are able to relate to them. So 2021, I'm excited for it, hoping some restaurants start opening up again, right? Go back to eat, going out to eat.
Wawa has spoiled me for the past year, so that's perfectly fine on my end.
I could be a spokesperson for DoorDash and Uber Eats at this point. honestly, once we're done recording this podcast, I'll probably order something from DoorDash. So.
And it's kind of ironic because like I feel like everyone tries to do like the DoorDash driving and stuff like that. There should be another app version for ambassadors at this point.
No, absolutely. So I am hoping to see some positives in the world itself, but personally, just looking to keep spreading a message, and continue to try to be healthier and be positive and move forward. So looking forward to 2021.
Well, I must say this episode is one for the books. Stephen, thank you very much for joining for the Change Within podcast. For those who don't know who we are or want to listen to us, you can check us out at Anchor, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for the Change Within podcast. Stephen, thank you again and have a great night.
Thank you, my friend. Have a good one.
You too.